You're listening to Dead Air Podcast, part of splatterpictures.net.
What's up, everybody? Wes, Dead Air Knipe here with Always.
Typical Lydia.
Today's show, we're going to be doing the 2023 classic, The Last Voyage of the Demeter.
Or Demeter, if you're me, and just cannot reprogram my brain to pronounce it quote unquote properly. But I've understood that the Greeks pronounce it very differently. Spanish people from time to time pronounce it Demeter as well. Thelemics sometimes pronounce it Demeter, so I'm not alone. But yeah, Last Voyage of the Demeter, I would have to say, is a classic in my heart and my mind, forever and ever. Amen. Way better movie than you would suspect.
I'm going to have to agree. This was the first time that I've seen this film. I went ahead and I bought the Blu-ray and I watched it just before we sat down to record the show. And it took a little bit for me to decide how I felt about the movie, but then I fell in love with it in a big bad way. So I'm really excited to talk about this. I was meant to see this film in the theater, and that's not hyperbole. I genuinely was supposed to go to the movie theater. I had made plans to actually go myself. My partner was going away with their friends on a camping trip, and then when they were coming home from the camping trip, they had all planned to go see The Last Voyage of the Demeter together. And I said, you know what I'll do? We can talk about the movie when you get home. I'm going to go to the theaters while you guys are away, and I will just, show up for a one, please. I loved going to the movies by myself. And it never happened. It just, every day I said to myself, I'm going to go to the movies today. And then I said, oh, it's getting kind of late. I don't know. It's so far. Anyway, so I finally, after all of this time, and just before they left for work, my partner said to me, while they were holding the Blu-ray I just bought, I think you're really going to like this. And damned if they weren't right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm surprised you hadn't seen it. Not that I go to the theater a lot. I thought there was a larger buzz for this movie than there was. Something that I wanted to go to the theater, much like I wanted to go to the theater to see Nosferatu, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But Last Voyage of the Demeter, we watched it. I rented it here when it first came out. So very pleased with it. I should buy it on Blu-ray as well. I think I'll get the same version that you have because that sounds like a treat. It is such a good movie, and it's more action-packed than I even remembered, because the first maybe 20 minutes you kind of settle into okay, this is a period piece. It's gray and foggy. We're on a ship. Everyone's cranky, everyone's filthy, everyone's kind of dark and moody, and it is a dark and moody piece to begin with. And it does maintain that feel while also injecting a creature feature action sort of story underneath all of that, which is kind of a feat, but it doesn't clash. And I don't think it's ever done wrong. This is directed by Andre Overdahl, who brought us Troll Hunter, which was amazing, so amazing. Mm-hmm. And sort of in a way, that same sort of feel. It's a moody, foggy, gray.
Sad,
really. Very moody, very Norwegian film. And he's a very Norwegian dude. But it is a creature feature, and it has action, insane, intense action, but still maintains this sort of underlying chill of a moody period piece. Well, Troll Hunter isn't a period piece, but it feels like it because it's in fucking Norway. And then Autopsy of Jane Doe. Maybe not so much on the action, but it is a sort of a creature feeling film, and it's a terribly stark horror film that is moody and dark, but it's I hate saying chef's kiss to everything because that's like the fucking buzzword these days, but it is. Autopsy of Jane Doe is perfection. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, not so much, but it's still really, really good and it has its fans. This has that same sort of feel. Like it's got a mood and it's got a real powerful look to it. And it's got a very, like, not one note by any means, but it is encapsulating moody, dreary, dark, scary, horror, terror.
I think the films that you gave as examples of stuff that he has directed really tells the story right there, doesn't it? All of these incredibly simple films on paper, but with incredibly unique ideas. And I think that when it comes to this story, which is really only a few pages in a very famous story, and how you expand upon that and add characters where there were no characters. You have to think of something wholly unique while fitting into a very tight frame that many people, particularly horror fans who are going to go and see your movie, are very familiar with. There better be meticulous journal keeping. There better be someone lashed to that wheel. These are things that fans expect while they're watching a film that is kind of like a little side adventure for Dracula. Maybe wondering what he was doing on that boat. And I had always interpreted it as I think it's meant to be interpreted as a plague. And it would almost seem that these sailors were becoming ill, delirious. Maybe they had all assumed that there was some bad food, or, you know, generally speaking, they believed themselves to be cursed. But this is like I mean, I've heard it described as alien on a boat, and I think that's wholly accurate. I mean, down to sailors, the crew arguing about their bonus. They can't risk their bonus. They want their bonus. And I was like, holy hell, if we're not convinced what at least partially influenced this story, we definitely are now.
And all of the characters being very workaday, and it's very layman, and it's very regular folk. Even though they are seagoing people, they're pretty regular folk, and a lot of the crew has quit, so it's kind of a skeleton crew of what we would be used to on a boat of this size. We get to know these people pretty well. They're all, you know, very distinct characters as well, and they all, like it would be on any ship at the time, a very vast array of different sorts of people coming together to drive this ship across the sea. And even though we don't spend a heck of a lot of time with each character, really, we get to know them pretty well because they're just written very well. It's all written very well. So we have like the cook, who is very religious and very superstitious. And then we have the Irish guy who just wants to get home with his goddamn money. And he's suspicious of anyone that wants to take someone else's cut of the money. And he's very money focused. And you have other people who want to, you know, they know that this is their legacy of spending their life at sea. Whether they get a bonus or not is not really as important as getting to port and getting everyone there alive and getting the ship there intact. And like taking care of the ship. Maybe the ship is the most important thing to them. And the captain who is retiring. And I always love like a cop on his last day kind of thing. And we get that. The captain.
I couldn't help but think about that. It's good old Captain Elliot. By the way, Liam Cunningham. We've done a Liam Cunningham movie before. He's amazing. I loved him in Game of Thrones. He was one of my favorite characters. And him delivering that, I'm going to get a cottage, and me and my grandson Toby, because I made a promise to his mother, you see. I would take care and make sure that sea won't bleach his life like it's bleached mine. I was like, aw, Elliot, no you ain't. No you ain't.
Nope, this is your last day on the job. Something terrible is going to happen because don't you know you're in a horror movie? Yeah, it was tragic from the beginning because you know he's going to bite it, because we also, if you know, Chapter 7 of Dracula, the ship's log, the captain's log of Dracula, we know that this boat is, we already know it. We know the ending. It's like spoiler alert from last episode where I said, Nosferatu, spoiler alert, he's a vampire. Spoiler alert, the captain ends up lashed to the ship's wheel and it washes up in the shores of Whitby. Like, this is what happens. We know that this is what happens. I feel badly in a way for the people who would have approached this film without knowing that, maybe, and had, like, you know, different designs. Hopefully that was in the minority. Or maybe I should rephrase that. I wish that more people didn't know that, perhaps, because then more people would have gone to see the film and it would have been a surprise to them and it would have been more interesting. You had said that there is an alternate intro to this film, and it turns out that the alternate intro is the last 2 lines of Chapter 7 of Dracula.
Yeah, the interesting thing is this alternate intro, the original intro that's actually in the film, that's all completed with its music and its graphics finished up. The title treatment's different too, which I found was interesting, but essentially it is the constable and his men coming across the captain's body lashed to the wheel, and we can see the evidence of something terrible fate that has befell the Demeter that, you know, they can scarcely understand. And we see this humongous black wolf approach the constable and then take a dive off the side of the boat and then run, you know, onto the shore of England. And we know, if you're familiar with Dracula, how cool that would have been if they had included it. I'm not exactly sure why they decided to. Maybe they thought the movie is already almost 2 hours long. Maybe they just thought this extra minute and a half of footage was just wasted time. Maybe they couldn't finish the graphics on the wolf to make it look convincing and staying under budget. There's a million reasons why you make the unkindest cuts to your film, but I personally think it's a crying shame that they did not go with this intro.
Yeah, I think it would have helped as shorthand for people who were not familiar with the story or only know Dracula from Coppola's treatment of it, which is grand. And this is mentioned, the last voyage of the Demeter is mentioned in that briefly, as briefly as it is in the book. But there's also those people who wanted to see this because you read the captain's log and think, oh, that's a story I'd like to see. And there's been talk about it for years of it being made into a film. It's been on people's minds for decades, really, and maybe 100 fucking years, because it is a compelling slice out of that entire story. So starting it out with that sort of shorthand to sort of catch everyone up. People who are new to the story only know it from Coppola, don't really know it or think they know the story of Dracula from other things like, I don't know, Count Chocula was their favorite cereal as a kid. They think they know Dracula from that, or from any other iteration of Dracula where this is not mentioned. Like, it would put them on the same page as people who are very familiar with the Demeter. So I would have loved to see that, because that's the ending we need and that we know to put at the beginning. For us to play detective throughout the film would have been so much more enriching, I think. Not that this movie is not enriching. I absolutely loved every single minute of it. I'm shocked that it was a flop, because it's a flop. This has David Desmalchin, who is amazing, absolutely amazing as Wojciech in it, which we'll talk about. Javier Botet plays the titular, well, not titular. He plays the ship.
He's the boat.
He's the boat. He plays Dracula.
Oh, I was going to say the that's so great when the Demeter had a song just sang welcome aboard, you're all going to die.
Yes, he's so amazing creature actor that has been in a lot of movies we've talked about. always look forward to seeing him in a film. And this here is one of his greatest performances because we get to see a heck of a lot more of that body acting than we normally do. Normally, he's the set piece kind of creature a lot of the time. So it's nice to see a lot more physicality and really used very effectively throughout the film. Whether we see a lot of on-screen creature time or not, we see a lot of shadowed creature time, which is what he's all about. And like just an amazing film, but it was made for the same amount of money pretty much that they've spent on Nosferatu that is in theater right now, about $50 million. And Nosferatu has made its money back plus a couple more million in a week. Mm-hmm. This movie had made over 20 some million, 22 million or something. It was a flop, a really bad flop because that's less than half of its money it didn't make back. And I'm shocked. If you had asked me yesterday morning, if I thought that this had made back its money in box office, I would have 100% be behind. Yeah. Oh, it must have done really well. It probably doubled its cost, but no.
It's funny because I remember the trailers were everywhere. I remember being in the theater and they had full on standees.
Nice.
So you could see the standee in the theaters as you were walking by. This had a lot of visibility. And the thing about that $50 million budget, we don't normally talk, what we do sometimes, we shouldn't really talk too much about the budget because at the end of the day, good films will find their audience. It's just a shame that the companies that make these movies really only care about those first 3 days.
Yes.
And so unfortunately, you have to take into consideration that all that advertising costs, so $50 million, double it. So it would need to make over $100 million. Your little $50 million movie now needs to make $100 million just to break even and to be considered worth its salt. And then maybe, I don't know, you get more or it gets more, even more visibility, more acclaim or something like that. Because I think where, Robert Eggers doing Nosferatu and the buzz around that was, I think part of the excitement was the idea of that guy's movies, how he does his cinema, languid, quiet, long scenes, period pieces, and transferring that to a vampire story made a lot of people excited because whereas this is a period film, it has more in common with another recent vampire film from 2024, Abigail, which has a lot of action elements and an ensemble cast where you have, Abigail is about a group of ragamuffins essentially versus a vampire. This is the same sort of concept, a group of ragamuffins versus a vampire. And the unfortunate thing is, not unfortunate because I love Abigail. I think that's a fantastic vampire movie. That made a lot of money. So I don't know what the X factor might be, but I think it could have been just a lot of factors. Plus 2023, we're still very much in the mode of, we don't go to the movie theaters anymore.
Yeah, I think that was part of it, unfortunately. Or maybe it's just the nature of the story, too. It's like, I don't want to hear about people getting sick and dying. I really don't want to watch that. People bursting into flames in the sunlight or whatever, because we have all sorts of weird fears being realized with the pandemic, or we're just coming out of the pandemic. Theaters are struggling. The stock for AMC was plummeting to, I think, $6 a share or $3 a share, something like that, like just pennies on the glass. It was really, really a dire time for theaters. And a lot of people were relying on things like the split premieres where it would be premiering in the theaters and on streaming, but it was $25 friggin' dollars. And it's still $25 to get a new release streaming. And it might have seemed too expensive for a lot of people, just so many things against it. So I was thinking that maybe it was something else that was in the theaters at the time, stealing some attention from this film. And it was a month almost previous, like at least 2 or 3 weeks previous, was the Barbie and Oppenheimer duo that you never expected, the odd couple of Barbie and Oppenheimer. People not only went to see that in droves, but they went to see multiple times. It was like Avatar. People went to see Avatar multiple times in theaters. People did that with that. Meg 2 was in theater at the beginning of August that year, 2023. It did really well. The Barbie and Oppenheimer thing, it was surreal how much money those films make. Haunted Mansion was in theaters the week before or 2 weeks before. Gran Turismo, Strays, Last Voyage of the Demeter, one of the lower performers of all that time. There was Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, did way worse. Same with Insidious, other horror things. Maybe August is just not good for horror. There was quite a few horror flops at that time. And Super Mario Brothers, the movie, which also didn't do very well. In the summer.
I was going to say in the summer, because I'm pretty sure that movie made like a boatload of cash.
Oh, yeah, almost like $500 million. But
yeah, but
in
again,
August, it was not doing good.
People had all their fill of the Mario Brothers at that point. If that's even possible. I love those wacky little dudes. But, I think that these types of things, there's no such thing as a sure thing. They went ahead and did the interesting thing. Do you know the origin of this film, why it got made?
Only that this script had popped around for a long time.
Years.
Yeah.
The original inception of this film was somebody on the set of Francis Ford Coppola's fucking Dracula movie in 1992 and looking at the model they used for the Demeter in that film. And then saying, like, almost, I don't think they use this exact example, but it's almost like in Hamlet, like where you wonder what adventures did Rosencrantz and Guildenstern get on when they left the story, and what would that be like? We've been hearing about Dracula's boat ride for over a century.
Yeah.
And, to my, like I said, I had never really given it serious thought. I'm such a literalist when it comes to the media that I entertain. If you want me to think about something, you need to have dialogue and a scene that associates with it. If you just tell me that Dracula went on a boat ride, my brain is like, yeah, because he needs to go from Romania to England.
Yeah, that's how you get there. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, and well, what about the Francis Ford Coppola one? I was like, well, how can he say he crossed oceans of time to see Winona Ryder if he doesn't get on a boat? He has to say that line because he got on a boat. That's how my brain works. And I don't, Dracula, it always makes me question, like, how much does this motherfucker need to eat? Like, because it seems like he seems insatiable. Like, it seems like he seems like you need to eat one full man a day, and that's you rationing. Like, and if you're untethered, you're eating livestock and 2 men a day. Why do you need to eat so much?
No, and he also has the appearance of a semi-revenant and needs to get his strength up. So it's like he's been in torpor for like weeks or something beforehand. I guess during the time of inspection and packaging, he couldn't be eating people. So he had to spend a couple days. So I guess therein lies the term monster, because he needs to eat like 3 villagers a week at the very least. And ideally about 10.
I mean, when you get into certain interpretations of Dracula and the amount of people that befall this plague, this nebulous kind of plague that's going around, you get the sense that he's literally eating hundreds of people. Mm-hmm. And they even have a line in this about there was no one left to
Yeah.
to eat. When, I'm sure she's being hyperbolic, but I get the point. And given how many people he's eating in just a few days, it's hard to argue with how much he probably needs to feed for whatever reason. But fuck all that, Liz. We've been talking for like 25 minutes.
I know. I didn't expect that we would be talking for 25 minutes because I did want to ask you, I don't know if it was just my household or any household. My mom always said you should start the new year doing what you want to do for the next year. You set the pace with that first day, January 1st or the 2nd or the 3rd. You spend some time creating habits, maybe enjoying things more, that things that you discovered the previous year that you want to really dive into for the coming year. If you want to have a clean house or clean spaces around you, you spend that day cleaning maybe. Or if you want to get more active, you spend those first few days of the year creating that habit of getting more active. I listened to a lot of horror podcasts and watched movies. What did you do for the first few days of 2025, Wes?
I also made or watched movies. I had gotten a few for Christmas. I had also gotten some new albums, some new records, and I had listened to those over the course of the first week of, I'd say, of the month. And I just using things. I think that just to I suppose to interpret what you're asking, what sort of habits I want to form. I don't know if this is a conscious thing, but perhaps unconsciously, I want to make sure that things that people give me or that I am using my own money to get, I'm actually going to engage with the material. I've also this is sort of a habit that I got into last year, but perhaps just to reaffirm it, is to really not just buy some of these boutique collector's edition versions of films, but I go through all of that extra features. I will watch the fucking movie with the director's commentary. I will read the essays that they write and put in the booklets. Just, you're spending, you don't think about it sometimes, but when you're getting into the realm of like 40, 50 fucking dollars for a movie, and it comes with all of this extra material, in a sense, that's what you're paying for. You're paying because they made documentaries for this. They have commissioned new artwork. Somebody wrote an essay and they included it in that. And then I put it on a shelf and maybe take a picture of it, be like, look at this movie I got. And then I'll watch that eventually, really trying to first in, first out. When you get something, watch it, consume the material. Also, just as an aside, it's great for what I'm doing on TikTok because a lot of these videos are coming from doing this.
Yeah. Exploring those things that you have. And that kind of ties in, maybe inadvertently, to I want to read more stuff that's on my shelf. I did the Read What You Own challenge for my BookTube channel last year, and where you pick X amount of books. And it was torture because I sort of did it all at once. You couldn't read anything. There was a book ban, a book buying ban, a book ban entirely. You had to read 25 books off your shelf, or I had to read 25 books off my shelf. Some people have done 100 books, and wow, I'm in awe of that. But I'm going to pick 25 books off my shelves and read 1 or 2 a month at least and see how far I get to engage fully with the physical material. Books are all physical in my world. I rarely buy an ebook, and I like ebooks and they're handy. I usually have 1 or 2 on the go, but I usually use those for the nonfiction books or books that I'm not that interested in, or a new author to me. I'll test them out. But I typically have a physical book, and sometimes they're gorgeous collector's editions too. So it's the same sort of thing. I want to really appreciate those. I spent the first few days finishing up some reading I was doing and starting some new books, which sounds like it's every day, but I do want to read a little bit more this year. And I'm also moving all my blog stuff to my website. I'm not leaving reviews on Goodreads or Amazon because it's useless in my mind. There's 100 other like reviews. If someone wants a curated review of specific horror books, they'll be on my blog, right? Like, why put them where everyone else is putting them and where people are engaging in all sorts of like 1-star revenge reviews and bullshit like that? I don't want any part of that. So less social media, more physical media in the shape of books for me, for the most part.
I think that's worthy. And also, I think in a roundabout way of doing this, I don't know if you feel this way, and I think you're reading the challenge, you're reading what's on your shelf challenge that you were doing. If you guys haven't watched any of those videos, I have, which makes me a better person than you. And I think ultimately the lesson I think is coming out of a lot of collectors is let's consume less and enjoy more.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you are going to be the type of person who enjoys horror, because we enjoy horror, obviously, we have a whole fucking show about it, maybe we should spend more time watching the movies and really getting in there. And to me, at the very least, it has absolutely curbed my loading up my Amazon cart and just hitting fucking buy, because it's so, you don't even think about it. I can just drop $100 on movies, and by hitting a button once, if we're being completely honest, and then it shows up tomorrow, and then I open it up and I'm like, yeah, boom, put it on the shelf, and then I go and take a nap. Like so I think like I really wanted to, and then also get out of the habit of, don't feel compelled, because you make videos on YouTube, I make videos on TikTok. Don't just buy things to make a video, because that's also psychotic.
Oh,
because
wow.
it's
Yeah.
like,
And a lot of people do that. And it's very obvious when people do that.
and sometimes I don't want to get like controversial or anything like that. Sometimes I get the distinct impression from certain reviews that I've seen where I have a strong suspicion they haven't actually watched the movie. Like, but because of the volume and the speed in which you need to get the review out. And the reason why I say that is because if you watch several reviews, all of a sudden you start getting a consensus, and all of a sudden everyone not is saying the same thing in a roundabout way. They're saying the exact same thing. Is it possible everyone who has this type of thing where they habitually, let's say even professionally, review films every single day, and they all as one singular entity come to the same conclusion? Or are they just kind of getting the consensus of what everyone is saying and say, I can bang out a 60-second review of this movie and just say all those talking points, and I've gotten my video out into the algorithm and I can grow my content that way? I have no proof, and I am not naming names, but it's just a feeling I've been having lately.
And it's not even new necessarily. I remember when I was doing the horror anime podcast, the short-lived, and someday I would love to start that podcast up again. I noticed people on YouTube taking written otaku reviews or Kotaku reviews. Well, they were otaku reviews, but they're on Kotaku, and they would just like sort of act them out and pantomime them. And I'm like, I don't think this person has any interest in horror anime, but they're reading this guy's article and should be reported to YouTube, because they're literally ripping off this person's article and just reading it on a teleprompter as if it's their own words. And it was disgusting to me. Absolutely disgusting. So that has been going on for some time. And now with AI, it's even worse, because you can feed 3 people's scripts. You can copy paste the scripts from YouTube, from the closed captioning, paste them into ChatGPT and have it write you a script using all those 3 people's talking points, but in your style. Let's say if I want to sound like a Gen Alpha brain rot addict. You can have ChatGPT create a script with that style out of 3 other people's completely different styles. But yeah, with all those talking points as if you've seen the film, even with the same phraseology, because it's going to creep in. But yeah.
Dracula has absolutely no Riz, not Sigma, skibbity toilet. I'm sorry, but fuck all that, Lydia. It has been almost 40 fucking minutes. I hope we edit this down.
Yes, I will be editing it creatively.
Okay. Fuck all that, Lydia. What is this movie even about anyways?
This is about Demeter, god of the harvest, goddess of the harvest, no less. And, you know, when we're talking about you want to consume less and enjoy more, Dracula is on a totally different page. He wants to consume more, and boy, is he enjoying it. Oh my God, this is the harvest.
He's a fatter fucking pig than the pigs that he literally ate as an appetizer before he started eating whole ass men.
I sort of get, okay, from the monster point of view, okay, he had to stay in his dirt coffin for like a week going through customs or whatever, because we know how shipping is. We just had a postal strike here. If he was caught up in any sort of fucking rigmarole, he would be in his box, nothing to eat. You know, he couldn't very well bring a pig in there with him. But anyway, so he's hungry as shit. So he wakes up, eats some rats real quick, eats some pigs and dogs. Oh, poor dog. You know, he eats whatever he can real quick to get up a little bit of energy because he needs a lot. He needs he's like sumo wrestler level of calories is what this guy needs from blood alone. And then he starts on his like rationing of like a body a day. And he still looks like shit.
I like my vampires monstrous. And the most compelling thing that this film had going for it was the silhouette on that poster. And I think that I had heard early complaints. They're showing the vampire too much. I think that there might be some truth to that when I actually finally saw the film. Early on anyways. But I think that it was so compelling to me because of how he looked. I'm a Nosferatu guy. I like when vampires look like that. And it wasn't, Nosferatu is not the first time that I ever encountered that, but my brother, I might have mentioned this before, was a massive fan of Vampire the Masquerade. And he had all of these books. I was quite young when he was collecting all of the books, and he and his friends would play the tabletop game. And I remember he had all these different editions, and I remember he had these marbled dark green dice that were all mystical and shit. And one of the factions of vampires that you could be was like a monstrous revenant type vampire. And I used to look at that picture of those vampires over and over and over again, and I would try to copy the artwork in the book. Like I would put paper and I would trace the artwork, and I was so into them. And so from that point on, anytime that I like me a sexy vampire, you know, Gary Oldman, hot as fuck when he's not that weird old man with the butt hair, but when he's in the gray suit,
Yeah.
but I love my favorite part in Coppola's Dracula is when he's in the fucking boat as the big bat.
Yeah, the big bat is what we get and what we needed. And, you know, if you're interested in this movie because of Nosferatu, my hat off to you, because that is the sort of revenant that we're dealing with. And I'm just going to put my Clan Bruja Vampire the Masquerade pin on my shirt now because, yeah, I was, definitely played Vampire the Masquerade, and there definitely were the most revenants in that game as well. So,
wow, everything I learn about you makes you cooler in my mind. That's actually fucking badass, dude.
it is now, but at the time, trying to explain to somebody what LARPing was, because I didn't play at tabletop. I was like full on LARPing. There's a tabletop element to LARPing, but yeah, it was LARPing. But anyway, this film absolutely sells you Revenant big time. We don't even get a moment. If you're waiting for a moment of sexy vampire, and maybe that's part of the problem, maybe that's part of why this flopped, is people were like, well, I wanted him to eat enough virgins so that he got sexy, and then became some sort of thirst trap.
I was, first of all, it was kind of working for me. Second of all, I
that's
second
that's
of,
amazing.
second of all, I genuinely was so fucking curious. Does he speak? Will he speak? Are we ever going to see him transformed? And there's a little moment that we'll get to at the very end where I almost thought, oh, we're gonna see what this human Dracula look. Nope, we are not. And I applaud them for that. This idea of keeping this creature monstrous, that revenant, barely human, dangerous, feral almost, with hints of humanity in it. And it's almost as if, Dracula's on vacation. He's on his boat. He does not feel the need to be a gentleman. He is sleeping in the maggots and the dirts, baby. He doesn't want to have to act like a man, a gentleman. He wants to be a fucking bat, which I'm sure feels good. He can usually only be a bat probably at his castle unless people show up.
And maybe it's more like, not that he needs to feed one person a night necessarily, but he's like, okay, this voyage is 10 days. There's like 12 people on the ship or whatever. There's probably more. There should be more, quite honestly. But let's say for whatever, because I didn't count everybody on this ship. Not that I want to ration one a day or whatever. I just want them all dead by the time we get there. That's all. It's this like swim up bar mentality, where like I don't normally drink this much, but there's a swim up bar, Wes.
It's a swim up bar indeed, and I get the impression that it's just Dracula letting his hair down, and
Toying
he does
with his food too.
wanting to be terrifying, and I think that it goes really well, and it elaborates on a story that previously is a very short section of Bram Stoker's original novel, and we just know that it is some kind of doom and curse and plague that is a devil is with us on the ship, and it's more foreboding. It's the entrance of the old world into the new world, and how terrifying that must be. But before they get to that place, Lydia, they need more crew, and they encounter a row of dudes. They need 3 men and one big muscly dude, but he sees something he doesn't like, Mark of the Dragon. So that we're still in Romania, and they're on a port, so there's a lot of people who aren't from here. It's a melting pot of all kinds of different people. But that one guy who got the spot that our good doctor Clemens wants to get a spot on, he is going to get rejected because Wojciech, the first mate, they don't call it a quartermaster, is what they call him. He is not interested in passengers. He wants strong sailors because they have a limited amount of spots, and they're working with a small amount of crew and rations and all that shit. But he manages, once this one guy sees that Mark of the Dragon, he gets scared, and Clemens is in. That guy basically is, you guys are all fucked.
What I really like is that he gets on because the captain has some say in this, and it's like, well, we may need a doctor. That'll help. And he's intelligent like that. And we also get sort of that trope in these introductory scenes of the villagers warning other people of doom and gloom. And that happens in the original Dracula. That happens in most good Dracula stories where the villagers are just like, oh, you're going there? Oh, it's cursed. Same sort of thing. Like, I'm not going on this ship. We know what that dragon emblem means. I'm going to stay away from that. I have that tattooed on my back, actually. Little tiny dragon.
Man, you got all these cool symbols going on today. I like it.
But he also poses a very good counter to Wojciech, who is played by David Dismalchian. This dark, maybe brooding quartermaster who he cares more about his ship than the people on it, for sure. Very suspicious person, very calculated person. And then we have this extremely intelligent black doctor that is just the total opposite of him, and a quite caring and interested person who is interested in learning more about life and seeing more, and at this point getting back home.
Where it's almost as if he's coming off as someone who is too educated, you got soft hands. It's that kind of mentality where this isn't a sightseeing trip. We need sailors. And you openly admitted in this recruitment phase that you haven't been on a boat in so long that you might not even really remember. It'll take me a little bit to get my bearings again, but I've been on a ship before. So that's not what you're looking for. You have 3 spots. You need like big, strong dudes right out the gate that have sailed before, because not only do you have to do a fairly long journey, it's almost a month of traveling, you also got to load all this fucking dirt.
Yeah. So you might need some strong backs, but you also will probably need a doctor and dead reckoning. I mean, not every sailor knows how to dead reckon using the stars, but he does because he's an educated man.
Yeah. Once they get on board, we are introduced to our ragtag group of ragamuffins. I think that if this film is guilty of anything, it's very solid tropes. And
I suppose I see what you mean.
I don't necessarily think it's a problem. I'm just saying I noticed it. But also in a film that didn't flop, again, I'll bring up Abigail. That film is just chock-a-block full of fucking tropes of any type of criminal that could be in a gang of criminals that have nothing to do with each other. It's the criminal equivalent of like the jock, the geek, the cheerleader. This had me at a point where I was like, okay, so you have the older retiring captain and you have this educated man who is here to be I don't believe in superstition. I am a man of science and knowledge, and everything can be explained, and I will analyze and rationalize things out of existence. I don't believe in folklore and magic. I am not a religious person. You don't worry. You have a very religious Joseph, their cook. He's very religious. And you have like here's the tough guy. Here's the jerk. Here's the sort of like quiet, sweet guy. And a little boy, Toby, who's got his dog, and he's the captain's grandson, very sweet kid. And it got to the point where I said to myself, where's the girl stowaway? Because this is just a bunch of dudes. And yeah. And almost the minute I said that, boom, she drops out of a coffin of dirt. Now, in 1931's Dracula, Renfield hops a ride on the boat. And so people might be familiar with because they're like, why is Dracula traveling by himself? In the book, he does travel by himself. So this is like fairly book accurate. There's no Renfield. There's no nothing. He doesn't bring his brides with him, but he did bring himself a schmackerel, midnight snack in the form of a peasant girl.
Yeah, who would be destined to be a bride if you're following like typical dyed-in-the-wool Dracula lore, but she also conveniently fills a role as sort of a femme field at this point. And that's what I think of her more as, because she may not be, wanting to collect souls for the master or whatever, and she's not howling at the moon, but she is connected to him. and that becomes more and more apparent. But the minute we see her, because we are steeped in Dracula lore, we know what we're in for when they find a half dead chick that needs a blood transfusion. And I don't know, like, I know that it was either too much blood or not enough. That was your problem at this day and age. And Clemens may be a doctor, but he's a doctor of the 17th century. So it's about humors, bloodletting, leeches, transfusions. It's amazing that he has his transfusion kit with him. But that's what he decides on a dime. This girl needs a blood transfusion. And what more would a revenant Renfield want? Blood. I mean, it's just too perfect. You would, I would think we should monitor her and see maybe she needs food and water. Food and water is what they give her. They give her blood.
Immediately.
Yeah.
And it seems to work, but this is all fiddle-faddle food, Lydia. You got a lady on board of a boat. Ladies, a bad omen.
Yeah, they're bad luck, and that's exactly why we had cabin boys. But Toby is related to the captain, so I'm sure there's no tomfoolery going on there.
These guys seem like pretty stand-up guys. They don't waste a whole lot of time. I mean, they used Dracula's revenant image as advertising. So they do let you know pretty quickly that we got ourselves a vampire situation on here. We start seeing the vampire in glimpses throughout the early stages of this film, and up until the point in which he makes his first attack. Thankfully, the meanest old bastard that you ever saw is the first human to die, that Russian dude who makes like a vaguely racist remark. But not before the sweet dog Huck and all of the animals. They kept livestock. And it's funny. I never thought of that before. I never thought of the fact that they would bring live animals onto a boat. I always, learning about old ship travel in school, I always they just drank their piss and picked weevils out of hardtack. Isn't that what?
God. Yeah. And eventually they discovered that they ought to have lemons on board to stave off scurvy, which we've actually had a rise in scurvy because of food insecurity in the north here in Canada. Unfortunately, older people on fixed incomes have been susceptible to scurvy all over again. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It's how you keep chicken freshest, especially if a transatlantic voyage is taking you between 10 and 20 days, depending on weather. Like, you can't, those chicken breasts are going to go off in an hour in the Mediterranean heat. It's, it makes sense. But then you've got to have somebody to muck it out, right? And if you're going for a long time and you're feeding these big guys who are doing physical activity like you don't even fucking know, they need to eat good food, right? And they need to eat fresh food. And they need to eat protein, high amounts of protein and fresh vegetables and lemons. That's what they need. And lots of them.
The other thing that they need is speed, Lydia. Oh my God, they got a big fat fucking bonus ahead of them. And even to the point in which they even made their money back from the villagers who transferred all these crates with them, because for whatever reason, they gave them even more money just to excuse themselves to leave before nightfall. This voyage is setting all of these people up. The captain's going to retire. Wojciech is going to inherit the ship. And the thing that I like about this is it genuinely very early on establishes a camaraderie between the shipmates. Clemens and we learn the young lady's name, Anna, are the true outsiders here. All of these guys, and the Russian dude says it himself. I've traveled with everyone on the ship before, except for you. And all of a sudden, all of our animals are dead. So I really think that they do a good job showing camaraderie, even when Clemens kind of like goes to defend himself and like makes a threatening gesture. They're pulling knives out on him immediately. So I was like, yeah, man, like they would be a tight knit crew. It's a small crew. They've been sailing forever. Like, I mean, Wojciech, you get the sense that he's probably been on this boat since he was fucking 5 years old or something. And then people do start dying. Now they don't shy away from that first attack. We see Dracula show up like fucking Jason Voorhees. Or the one scene where they first show him kind of reminded me of the cave creatures from The Descent, where he's just kind of like, standing there. In that cool night vision shot. And we can get a sense like that we've seen to what they did to Huck, what they did to the Russian dude. I keep forgetting his name, but this movie is going to go for it in terms of its gore, which I really liked.
It is a hefty bonus that they're being offered, like £75 at the time in British money. At that time would translate to about $17,000 to $20,000 today. So it's a pretty hefty amount of money, and it's not like money. In some places you could be set for quite some time on that. You can be, that's a down payment on something, a house, a car, something. Like, it's a good money, it's decent money. So I can see why they're all very beholden to that. And they are a very tight crew. Even though Clemens does point out later he was born on a ship, basically, just the same as half of these guys, except that he's of a different color and is educated. Those are the two great big differences, creating a huge rift between him and the rest of the crew. He does pull his weight. Like, we learn that at the beginning, he's put on night watch. That's a pretty important role. It might sound like a boring burnout job, but it's not. It's a very important role, and he shares it with one of the other mates on board. We're introduced to one of the devices that is used in this film of knocking on the ship, because as Toby explains to Clemens as he's giving him the tour of downstairs and all the cool animals and the cute dog, that you can just knock on the wood of this ship and the sound will travel throughout the entire ship. So if you need anything, you just knock, and that's how they communicate, and it saves them having to use any of the pipes, they say. So I am suspecting that is like the pipes that you talk into and yell into, right? On a ship. So instead, they just knock on things. And when Clemens is doing his first night watch, where we are introduced to the lovely Dracula, where I think that a lot of people would bitch that you see too much of the monster. I do agree with this, but we do get this neat tactic of knocking on the ship, and it creates this big echo, much like you did in our intro.
Yeah, I had a lot of different. I was thinking about a gulping noise for all because he goes to town on drinking people's blood. Yeah. And then I was thinking about like his hisses. He hisses a lot.
Or a flapping noise.
The flapping noise would be good. But by that last shot of the movie, I said to myself, it's got to be the knocking. Because I didn't want to do the knocking at first. Because I said, well, there's a sound I'll do. It's like, no, it's too cliche. But it was such an important aspect of the storytelling in this particular film. I thought it would be disingenuous to just not do it because I thought I shouldn't.
A lot of the time, tactics like this in films and books drive me nuts because they usually fall flat or they are spoon-fed, but this one actually works. We have amazing sound design, really good music. Bear McCreary does the music in this. So always it's just good. The sound design of this film is impeccable. And when like the fog is closing in, you wouldn't think fog has a sound, but here it does. And so having this huge booming echo in an otherwise very quiet film, and not quiet, sleepy, boring quiet, just atmospherically quiet, like it would be on a ship at sea, it is just heart pounding. It's a very cool use of the sound, and it's not overused at all. And it's used very effectively later on in the film, especially when Toby begins to panic. Like really, really wonderful usage of a tactic.
So Petrovsky is missing, and now it is Clemens and Olgarin hearing something, and Olgarin being by himself, and also now they find him strung up. Essentially, it looked as though he had lost his balance and fell, but why would he be up there in the first place? He's doing night watch. There's no reason for him to have climbed up one of the masts. Now they find him, and not only that, but he was with someone else, and now that person is missing. So all of these conversations about what could have done this to these animals, and where these people could be going, it's starting to become obvious that something is going on. Now, one of the problems with films of this nature, and I suppose this is not, when you were describing The Villagers, it made me realize that this is in keeping with Bram Stoker's entire story, in which the villagers, while he is on his way to Dracula's castle, keep doing crosses, and they keep, please, for your mother's sake, and handing him crosses and all of that stuff. And no one's saying, John, so just so you know, there is a guy who lives at that castle named Dracula. You know him because that's who you're going to go see. So he is a ghoul who eats people. And I know that sounds crazy, but we've all lived here a long time. And he looks like a man. He's not. He has super strength, and he's cold to the touch like a corpse because he's dead. And he will eat you or enslave you or both. And so don't go to the castle. Let's go the other way. This deal is bonk. Don't worry about it. There'll be other deals. No one says that in Dracula because you don't have a story if the villagers actually openly talk, because the idea is they're so full of fear and superstition that even uttering perhaps his name would be akin to a curse. So they don't even want to.
He's worse than Voldemort. There, said it.
It's worse than Voldemort. And so in that type of situation, you have a woman here who you could excuse because she did get chomped on a lot, and we know what that means. But you have all of these people standing around. What's happening? And we know what's happening. And Anna knows what's happening. And no one's just telling them what's happening. And when Anna is talking to Clemens about what's happening, they're not telling anyone else. They're just having little secret squirrel meetings with each other. And then they go back into this, like, and literal characters are like throwing shit, like, what's going on in this ship? And Clemens and Anna are just like, I don't know, man. It's definitely not a monster that we've already gone hunting for by ourselves and decided not to tell anybody. Because like, maybe it's because Clemens is still at a juncture. He's a man of science, a man of the world. He wants the world to make sense. And the more he learns, the less it makes sense. Maybe he's not ready to admit it. Maybe his Voldemort is believing that a undead ghoul could be roaming around the ship, but they also can't find him. So I guess without that empirical evidence, and all they have is a stowaway girl who no one trusts anyway because she has a vagina.
She's terrible luck. I mean, what is she even doing? And she keeps saying we need to get off this ship, which is like, hello, crazy. We're at sea.
Yeah, but things are getting tense around here. No one's talking to each other, but they all know something, some doom, some curse has befallen the ship. But the very least is that Olgarin is not dead. He's got a fever. He's screaming a fit, but he should be okay until he wakes up, not feeling so hot, and goes after poor little Toby. And in doing so, bangs his head against a door so many times that he breaks through a wooden door with his skull. And don't think it doesn't leave a mark.
No, and so terrifying. By this point, they know there's something going on. Anna has told them in the most basic terms that there's a monster on board, without getting into details. They have been noticing things out of the corner of their eye. You would like to think that they're way more observant because of the nature of their jobs, especially night watchmen, that they would have noticed what we've seen, like from our perspective, the godly perspective of the audience. We see Dracula swimming in the fucking water alongside the ship and jumping up in front of the bow. And we see things in the fucking mast. Like we see him around the ship more often than they do and in the shadows. It's not one of those like Blumhausian tactics where you see the baddie in the shadows at every fucking corner. It's not quite like that fun, but you do see him quite a lot. And you know that that must be setting them on edge. So when the captain locks Toby in his quarters and is like, if anyone comes down here, you yell. Pretty soon we're having the most maniac attack scene where O'Garen's trying to get in through this door to Toby. Like he can smell the blood, basically. I guess they should have given him a transfusion too. That might have calmed him down a little bit. But everyone's up on deck and is no help to poor Toby, who is banging on the rafters.
This is a sweet little boy, Lydia.
He
And
is.
he is plucky. He likes to take care of the animals. He had to see his dog die. He screamed bloody murder when he saw O'Garen hurt. The captain is his grandpa. His grandpa, Lydia. And I was convinced that I was seeing a lot of familiar devices, to use your word, in terms of how this story was operating. And I, for a second there, was getting lulled into a PG-13 ensemble horror action hybrid film. And we know what those are like. And generally speaking, it's very easy to determine what characters are going to survive to the end of the film. Now, when I saw the introduction of this boy, no, first of all, in terms of the captain's log, the actual section that we are taking from Dracula, we don't know the names of these fucking crew members. We only know some very stark details. We don't know how many people were on board. We just know that they're all dead. And so to break the back of this small section of story and to tell a whole new narrative around it, you need to make a whole lot of changes in order to make that work for the function of a film. What they do here, as I was assuming, was they were just adding a bunch of characters that they're somehow going to get off the boat. Don't worry about it. And they're not going to kill the kid. They do. And just when you think that it's not as horrible as fucking possible, they put a brick on the gas pedal to being the most traumatic fucking death. Because after the Anna shows up with like the move, grab a shotgun, blow the fucking door down, she's here to help. I love Anna. She's a great character. We have this moment where, okay, so are these guys okay? Well, we saw O'Garen talking almost as if he was a little Renfield, a thrall, or are they thralls? Is that what you technically would be? Or
Yes, you would be. But it's also sort of a familiar at the same time.
A familiar, that's the word I was looking for. Mm-hmm. I wasn't 100% sure if he was, how much of a vampire he was. Well, the sun comes up and we learn quite quickly. This is a horrifying burn scene. It is so well done. I think this scene fucking rules. Like, I love O'Garen's immolation. Mm-hmm. It's so well done. The graphics, even if I find some of the early shots of Dracula, there, you get it. I'm not going to criticize like CGI. It's not relevant to me. Like, sometimes it just looked a little rough, but I got what they were going for. This scene fucking rules. It's really well done. And so you get this sneaking suspicion that, is Toby like a vampire? But then they start doing the transfusion, and they did a transfusion. And now we, living in 2024, know his grandfather actually is probably a great option for you to do a blood transfusion with. Yeah. So, and this helped Anna. So it'll probably help Toby. And there's actually like a really sad scene where they all kind of realize that Toby has died. And they're like, oh, like, how's Toby? Do you think I should maybe Like these crew members are very fucking sweet to each other. Like there's not like maybe Petrovsky was like the most rough of all of them, but these are like good dudes that love each other and like are a crew, and they especially love Toby. And they're all so heartbroken. And they do this funeral scene, and Anna says a little eulogy, and the captain, Elliot, is so upset. But then you say he moved, and they're trying to, like, he's gone. Like Clemens is like, Captain, like he's got no heartbeat, he's got no breath, it's not possible. And he pulls the sheet away because he can't be convinced. I saw him move, and I was like, there's no fucking way. It's daytime. Holy fucking shit. They have sweet little Toby awaken as like even a more complete vampire. Maybe because so much of his blood would have been taken because he's so much smaller.
Yeah, he's almost changed, and he's being fed now.
So, and then he begins to immolate because he's in the fucking sunlight, and he's burning his grandfather's arm and face as his grandson is bursting into flames. They pitch his ass off of the water, and then they just stay frozen on his ashen, crumbling face, sinking below the surface of the water. And I was just, holy fucking shit. This fucking rules. This is one of the strongest, saddest, but also action-packed sequences. And if you're not sure of this movie by now, gang, fucking watch it. This is good.
It's also the scene that I fear drove a lot of people into criticism, because they would be like, oh, modern convention says you don't kill the dog, and they've killed the dog. Modern convention says you don't kill the kid, and they've killed the kid. Modern convention says you don't call a woman a curse and try and keep her below decks, which they do. It's going in the face of a lot of this more modern filmmaking convention. And it's not an exploitation film. It's a mass market horror film, right? So they're not appealing to those masses. So when you see some of the criticism out there that this is a mean-spirited film, hell yeah, it is. It's a fucking Dracula story. You don't get more mean-spirited than that. And we've been coddled by romantasy horror for so many decades, and vampires via Twilight have become these softened, thirst trap, sexy, debonair, fucking aristocratic, frilly things, where when we come face to face with the monstrous Dracula in a monstrous horror story, we're pearl clutching, to use a West term. But that's what they're saying, that this is, not only do they not appreciate the CG, they don't appreciate the fact that it is so mean-spirited. But what do you expect? Quite honestly, we know, if you know the story, this ship needs to show up on the shore with exactly 0 people alive on it.
From the author of Night Face, ladies and gentlemen, the most compelling argument to why y'all a bunch of fucking babies.
Well, it's a monster. It's a man-eating monster. Like, he's not there to woo the woman. He's not there to make friends with the doctor. He's really not. Toby's death, you could say, well, maybe they didn't need to linger so much, or maybe they didn't need to make it so terrible. Maybe he didn't need to burst into flames. And I'm like, damn right he did, because we need to show how ruthless not only life at sea is, but how ruthless this monster is.
And they just lay it on so thick. Like, he'll never be cold. He may never be hungry. I'm an emotional person. I was welling up at Anna's eulogy. I was like, I really liked Toby. I thought the actor did a great job.
Oh yeah.
And I thought he was just like a plucky sort of Dickensian ship hand. And
he really is very much a ragamuffin kid. But what would it take to convince these guys that they need to chop a hole in the side of this boat and get the fuck off of it? Killing all the animals didn't work. plucking off their crew members one by one didn't work, having one of them burst into flames in a scene that made Chris say to me, if I'm ever burning alive, please shoot me immediately. Don't wait 2 whole minutes. It really is about a 30-second scene, but it feels like a lifetime that he's burning. I mean, it is very realistic and very terrifying. That didn't convince him to get off the boat. None of this is convincing them to get off the boat until this. Now they're pretty much on board. No ship pun intended with Anna's idea that they need to deboard. We've already had the cook try to do the exact same thing. He wants to leave. He tries to leave.
This scene is great. Oh my God, the fog, the lantern. And we haven't really talked about Dracula has got that echolalia. I don't know if he's got a touch of Tourette's. I can see a fellow Tourette's kid when I hear one. Sometimes when he's just repeating things like he's the fucking predator, and I kind of was in love with it, and I loved his mockery of all of that religion. I also love how Joseph really just just got the fuck out of Dodge. He was that dude that was saying, this is a demon, this is a devil, you are all, he ran down the list of every sin he perceives everyone to be guilty of. And this is why this is happening to us, except for me, the righteous, I'm going to leave. And this is the first time that we get a sense that Dracula can fly. It has the bat wings, that sound of the, and we can see the swirling of the fog. This scene rules. And I kind of love, like, they didn't give him a graphic death. It's just that sad boat, dunk, almost in mockery, like, here's your boat back.
Yeah. And your Bible splattered in blood because obviously crosses and Bibles do sweet fuck all.
And, you have this moment where this convincing Wojcik, who is the person, that quartermaster, who doesn't really like Clemens anyway, because he wanted strong crew members, but, he did save Toby, and this is all dangerous. And we also learn that Captain Elliot now, after this horrifyingly traumatic event, is now also has Dracula behind his eyes. He is whispering to him to make sure that they stay on course. And so he is sort of locked in his quarters feverishly, because we're all dead. We're all doomed. This is a doomed vessel. He's going to keep that log, which is going to be useful for maybe some other characters later.
Bram Stoker.
but the scuttling of the Demeter, again, this is Dave DeSmalchin as a force of nature. This is the most angry. This is the most, he kind of feels the walls closing in around him, because he is the person who, this place is my home. This is not a boat. This is not a cargo ship. You're asking me to destroy my home. A home, by the way, was just promised to him. This, all they have to do is get to London, and the Demeter is his. And I love that they don't draw this out too much. And that scene of I love this place, this is mine, I'm going to be the one to destroy it. That is such a well-crafted, the exact payoff that you want for that scene. Brilliant. It's fucking just another, I'm telling you, the whole back half of this movie, fucking win. All the scenes are good.
And it's not that the beginning of the film is a chore by any means. It's beautiful. It's atmospheric. It sets you up for this. It sort of lulls you into the state that Dracula would want you to be lulled into, to get you out from the dock and on open water where he can have his way with you. So yeah, I fully agree. I don't understand why this film didn't perform the way I think it ought to have, or as well as its contemporary, only a few years, like a year down the road, no, with Nosferatu. Now, do you think maybe the the dismissal of Catholicism and Christian faith in this film had something to do with why people didn't like it?
No,
Okay, because we have been
no.
trouncing Christianity in horror films for quite some time.
Yeah, and think about the biggest, like some of the biggest horror movies ever. Like I'm thinking of The Exorcist. Like that's one of the most beloved horror movies ever made, and it is a scathing indictment of the church and the failure of religion. And some of the biggest horror movies ever, like, are a condemnation of institutionalized religion. And I think that in order to tell the tale properly with a Dracula story, he is a literal affront to God. And whether you want to make that implicit or explicit, it's there either way. There is no interpretation of Dracula that he is not a mockery to religious symbols, to religious institutions, to men who believe in God. So I think it is paramount, like a paramount element. But I think you might be closer to, like, I just think it's fucking rough. I just think it's, I think genuinely it might be just that mean-spirited term that you use that I guess someone, perhaps a review had said or something like that.
Yeah.
I see it. I see people thinking that this was going to go better for them because they have a Scooby-Doo-esque plan. And much like Scooby-Doo, it, like, you have Captain Elliot, who kind of like funnily enough commandeers the plan, because he is told through Anna, through Clemens, all of them, and he has this speech: I'm going to basically, you guys get off this boat, we're gonna sink the Demeter, and I'll do it, but we're going to do this by, this ship is never getting to England, is what the plan essentially is.
We're gonna burn it with him on it. Yeah,
exactly. And I'm going to make sure that the boat doesn't get turned around. I'm basically here. You guys get to the lifeboats. So they have all of these plans, and it just falls apart immediately because, holy hell, people start dying again. And the second the bodies start ramping up, you get the sense that there's no way that this plan can possibly fail, because one of the things that they have pointed out was that they're only a day away from England, right? And there's still way more people than he needs to feed. And therefore, he doesn't need to take one person a night anymore. He could just kill them all at any time. And he's basically done playing with them. And now it is them versus Dracula at his full power.
absolutely. And we get to see the things that we've been here for, Dracula flying with wings. And he looks a lot like the Creeper from Jeepers Creepers. And maybe that's another thing with people having like a lot of baggage with that franchise and that director. So maybe because he's kind of Creeper-esque, they're like, oh, I don't like this because it's like Jeepers Creepers. That could be part of why people don't like it. There were a lot of critics that loved it. It has a great rating on rogerebert.com. So like there's some very strong voices for this film, but it's the money. They didn't make the money. So
It's
at
so,
this
it's
point,
such a shame.
yeah, like I want there to be a sequel. I want this to be hand in hand with Nosferatu. I want this to have so much more success than it had claimed in box office. It deserves so much more, and they really need to come up with another way of determining success of films, really honestly, especially when you have such a great cast, such great writers, such a great director, wonderful music, sound design, even the effects, like everything is really on point with this film. So that it didn't get better treatment is just insane. But here we get sort of the marriage of all that. The lighting and direction, the photography, at a ship at sail at night in the fog with a creature stalking a harried and desperate crew who wants to shoot it out of the sky at this point. Well, until they realize that it flies. then it turns into shooting it out of the sky or whatever they can do to vanquish this or disable at least this vampire so they can get off the boat. Because it's been proven that if you get into one of these lifeboats, it's just gonna go and fucking kill you there. So they need to like disable it, wound it, something here. But we get it taunting, attacking, killing, joking, making fun of, creeping, and we get to see its face even more clearly. Not through the spyglass at this point. We get to see it talking to people. And I just think that it's done so very well. So, like you said, some of the earlier scenes of CG or the vampire itself and his face weren't 100%. This looks fucking great.
I agree. I think the earlier shots almost look a little under-rendered. I don't know if it's supposed to indicate that he's almost in a larval state. I think you might be onto something with how long he'd been traveling through Romania and the fact that he wasn't able to really stretch his wings, as you might say. And that might have something to do with it, or they were just trying to pick and choose how much money they were going to save until the end, because they get to this point where people are dropping like flies. Like Wojciech, the captain has a great scene where, you know, he's throwing the cross, the cross up to try to protect himself. Anna has sort of like mysteriously vanished as Clemens is searching for her, and we get to see him sort of spread his wings, and we can really see all of the detail on his fangs, on his face, the translucency of his wings. It really looks great. And it's exactly what I came here to see. I have a long criticism with Dracula. Not that I don't love the book, but I always lament the fact that whether it's Dracula or it is Carmilla, you kill a vampire when they're asleep. And so it's always so anticlimactic. And even though we spend almost an entire novel talking about Dracula, people being afraid of Dracula, people talking about his presence and his power and that sort of oppressive energy that he exudes, and he enters people's dreams and he stalks you, and he has prodigious strength, but there's no feats. And I know that's a lizard brain thing where I want to see, if you tell me somebody is super fast and can shapeshift and can do all this stuff, I kind of want to see you kicking a little bit of ass. I want to see you doing some stuff, which is why I always say Carmilla could beat up Dracula, because at least in Carmilla, she actually demonstrates all of these feats, albeit in a brief scene, but she physically is doing things in the space where I'm like, that's cool. It's very anime. I like it. This is a Dracula that I think they really wanted to emphasize how fucking cool and scary and unstoppable a bulletproof, flying, super fast, super strong, vicious creature would be like. And I listen, I love the hands. I love the eyes. I get it. But I want to see him being a monster and kicking some ass.
I think they do really well with that here when they have him and Anna tussling, and he has her enveloped in his wings and she's trying to escape through his wings. It just shows like he's tough to every fiber of his body, where she can't just tear through the membrane of the bat wing, which you could in a bat. Like, unfortunately, that would hurt them a lot too. It'd be terrible, because there are like veins and capillaries running through that, and you see that rendered really well in this vampire. But he is tough as shit, so he can hold her with one wing and laugh maniacally about it. Like, that's that bloodthirsty, relentless, maniacal, psychopathic monster that we're dealing with. And I think that they show that off really well. And the fact that he is just very, very swift, very tough, like a torpedo or a shark. He's got a very shark-like look for something that lives in the air.
I love Clemens' speech to him as he's calling out to him into the darkness. And and he applies science to what Dracula is. And he Clemens, even in his moments, rejects this notion of mysticism, gods, and magic. He says, you are an animal, and I can prove it, because here's everything that you do that operates as a beast. That's all you are. And it's so badass. And I love how the character, it's almost like a flat arc. He starts this film as a person who is scientific and a learned man who wants the world to make sense. And he's not a person who is confronted by the unexplainable and then says, oh, magic is real. He still looks it dead in the eye and says, I will analyze you. And that makes me not afraid. And I think that's so fucking cool. Dracula has a cool line too, where he's like, I'm not afraid of you. And he's like, you will be. I was like, that's a cool fucking line. I like that a lot. But I'll tell you what he is going to be afraid of, getting a goddamn mast shoved into him as Anna does some trickery and enacts this whole thing. And her and Clemens go overboard. And we have Dracula pinned to the ship, screeching in pain. That's wood, folks. Screeching in pain. We know the beast is not felled because there's a whole fucking book that still needs to happen before that happens.
Yeah, we know that he actually does make it to Whitby, to Carfax Abbey.
That's correct. And then I think we're getting out of here. We have, it's like the end of Jaws. We got two people floating on debris, and it's the Clemens and Anna show. And I'm like, here we go, man. Clemens and Anna, they're going to be pals. They're going to... What follows had me rolling fucking tears. I love tragedy in vampires. I love looking into the sunset and fucking like just, I want to die. I don't want to live like this. Anna has been a vampire this whole time, and the transfusion did nothing and will do nothing but delay the inevitable. And it's a beautiful scene as she burns. She looks so beautiful. And she burns and immolates while Clemens sadly watches it. And I was like, this fucking rules. I love this scene so much. I want to watch it again and again. And it's just so artistic. And when you have the monstrous, that's the other thing, the monstrosity of vampirism and the fucking tragedy of the curse. That is the two things, particularly the tragedy of the curse and how sad it would be to essentially be the living dead that can never look upon the sun again. And how would you live this way? You know, things like, you know, not to rag on Twilight. I get it. Like,
be whining, Louis, always whining. That's
listen.
Yeah. But you don't want to rag on Twilight.
I don't want to. Poor Louis. I don't want to rag on Anne Rice either. That's a lot of tragedy. But I don't want to rag on Twilight. But when you watch those films, it is, vampires are superheroes, and being no matter how many times a vampire will tell you, oh, you don't want to live like me. Oh, I'm a monster. They're hot. They're immortal. They don't get sick. They can fuck forever. And there's no downside. There's no downside to this fucking curse, especially since all their friends just become immortal monsters with them. This is the tragedy of vampirism, the sadness, the heavy sadness of vampirism. And that the curse is not a cool thing that makes you a superhero. It's a sad thing that makes you otherworldly to the point of existing outside of humanity. Anna wants no part of it. And the first choice she is going to make in her whole goddamn life is to end it. And that's beautiful.
What's a more beautiful or sad or tragic vampire suicide between this and 30 Days of Night?
Oh, don't make me choose, man. Come on.
I know, right? It's very close, because I think we have the bias of having 30 Days of Night be our first truly tragic vampire immolation. Monstrous and tragic immolation. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And very, very sad, and something we just wish we could pull them back from that brink in both cases. Like maybe we spend more time getting emotionally invested in 30 Days of Night than we do here, but it is so almost like a Viking death scene. Because
she gets up on that bit of debris and just, It's so good. It's so good. And you think, gang, that, well, they're all out of cool scenes. No, because there's one more cool ass scene that I love just as much right in a row. And that is, we have Clemens now. He has all the intel he needs. Don't forget, this guy's fucking smart. He is a doctor, and he knew the whole point was that this shit was getting delivered to Carfax. And even though it doesn't say who purchased it, he knows where it is. And he's drawing this beautiful picture of Anna. Oh, so I'm such a sucker for this fucking bullshit. Like I love this so much. It's so good. And then you hear that knock, knock, knock. And it's that walking stick that he had pulled out of the maggots in the dirt back on the Demeter. And you know who the owner of that walking stick is. And I think for a second, we see a gloved hand, we see a top hat, and you're like, oh my God, are they going to show him he's in the bar with him as a man? And it's even better, he's still a monster, but you can tell that perhaps like it's an illusion that other people can't see or whatever. And he vanishes in thin air. And then just before he does, brushes his fingers across Clemens' back. And like, you just get the sense of like, oh, I guess the implication is he's just like, I can kill you at any time, and I will later. But then Clemens, still not afraid, does that badass, like he's Van Helsing, like not like he's literally Van Helsing, but he's, you can tell they could
the new
do
Van Helsing.
Yeah, they could do Clemens the Vampire Hunter. Where's that?
I would like to watch that, and I so badly want a sequel when this happens, because someone made it off the Demeter, which isn't how the story really went, or it's that secret knowledge that we now have that Clemens has survived. And it feels so good to have somebody survive off this after all of that tragedy. We also have our hope set up that somebody will survive in the guise of Anna or Toby. So having somebody actually make it, and someone that we liked throughout the whole thing, it's like, it would have been nice if David Dastmalchian's character would have lived too, because
that would have been cool too.
Even though his boat would have been wrecked, it's like, well, you have your life, right? Isn't that nice? Life and $17,000, because they got there on time, I believe. But which, you know, just the accounting in me, I think that they got there in time. But all the same, it is reminiscent of all of the other vampire stories we know and the Dracula stories we know, where this aristocrat is loose on the streets of London in the time of Jack the Ripper. It's what we want from a vampire story that isn't at sea. So it's like the beginning of the story we know and love, or the Dickensian Druid or something like that. A really interesting vampire story is about to happen, and we can feel it. But I guess, I don't know if there was ever a plan to have a follow-up to this. I wish that there was. I hope that someday there is. I don't know if that was ever in the cards, though.
I don't know, because you would ask yourself, well, Clemens can't really be involved because we know the ultimate fate of Dracula. We know who's responsible for it. But then I start thinking about Nosferatu. And what is Nosferatu if not almost like these days? Yes, in 1922, you have the unofficial adaptation of Dracula. But by 1979, the Werner Herzog version gives us something that is really more interpreted as an alternate reality. People love multiverses and stuff like that. So now when you look at this new Nosferatu movie in 2024, you have two coexisting versions of the same kind of story. There's clearly room for it. So my take is, why can't we have almost as if Clemens as an interloper who has changed the fate of the crew of the Demeter by being the only survivor, and that's not supposed to happen. What else could he alter from the Dracula story that we're familiar with that could make it the story, but also have him show up, like maybe his like almost as in like a not like a time travel-y sort of way, but maybe he could take the place of Van Helsing and say, okay, I'm just learning as I go. So instead of an older man, or you could have Van Helsing with them teaming up and teaching him more about vampires. You can have them operating in this story as Clemens in Bram Stoker's Dracula, taking it to its natural conclusion. And I'm not saying you have to do 50 of these things, but one more. With this atmosphere and tone,
I could handle 50 of them because I'm sick to death of modern vampire stories. But it's being done in a way because we have like The Historian by Kostova. We have Mina's Child. I forget the author of Mina's Child. Another story about another vampire story involving Dracula and some of the cast of characters that we know and love, and a lot of new ones. We have, of course, Dacre Stoker's books of Dracula the Undead, and the other Dracula book that he, like the sequels to Dracula that Bram Stoker's grandson had written. So like, and I hope that Dacre Stoker continues to make more, and maybe they could have him, you know, come on board and help write this follow-up to the blending of these universes, because I mean he knows more than one or two people. He has more nemesis out there than Van Helsing. Why not Clemens as well? Have another doctor on his ass. It's fine. There's lots of room in Dracula's life. He rarely sleeps, so it's you know it just sets itself up for more room. There's another interesting Dracula story that sort of brings a lot of the lore of other monsters home with it as well, and creates a whole other legacy that Dracula had, written by Andrew Piper, who sadly passed away just yesterday or the day before.
Oh, wow.
A Canadian author, yeah. Really, really a wonderful guy as well. I have an interview with him and Nick Cutter and Rob Poby, two other authors as well, on my blog right now because I'd interviewed them ages ago. And this was well before Andrew Piper wrote The Only Child. And that's a fantastic story that you don't even know is going to get close to Dracula until you're 3/4 of the way and completely invested in this monstrous story. And then you realize who they're talking about. It's lovely. So there's all sorts of like alternate reality kind of vampire things that involve Dracula himself that are adjacent or blended, and it works. It definitely works. So, you know, even though we know the story of Dracula, there's many other different versions of it. So it could fit into there. Ask Dacre Stoker, he would tell you.
All I'm saying is if Dracula has time in his day for all those brides, he definitely has time in his day for Clemens.
Yes, I agree.
So what do we got next for him?
Coming up next, I would say that we have Blood Vessel coming up next because that's a vampire story, but we already did that one, and I would say we have Nosferatu coming up. But we've actually talked about Nosferatu before and haven't yet seen the Robert Eggers version of Nosferatu, which we probably both will soon. So in the meantime, we're going to hit up a proto-slasher called The House That Screamed from 1969, and I'm looking very forward to this, even though I don't know if I can find the uncut version. I think I'll probably end up watching a cut version, but we'll find out. I'm excited. I've never heard of this film before.
I came to it late. It was recommended to me, and I was told two things: gothic horror, proto slasher. Can you believe they combined the two elements together? And it is very gruesome. It is an incredibly dark concept. It is quite bleak, and I think you will like it.
I'm very interested, and I think it's going to be a nice tone. Even though we're not staying in vampires, we're staying in that dark turn of the century gothic.
Absolutely, and that's where we fit best. Things are sad, and everyone is wearing poofy dresses.
Bonus points if somebody bursts into flame.
I'm Wes Knipe.
And I'm Typical Lydia.
And you've been listening to Dead Air. If you like this show, you can find more episodes and other content on splatterpictures.net, Spotify, or wherever you download podcasts. We also upload all episodes to YouTube now, if you'd prefer to listen that way. You can find us across social media like Instagram, X, and TikTok, and the show is edited by Lydia Peever and hosted by Lydia Peever and me, Wes Knipe. We'll see you next time.
Theme music by Anorax at anorax.com.